All righty. Well, I have 1 o'clock, so we'll go ahead and get started. I know we're on real tight time schedules today, and there's another session that starts at 1:45. So I want to make sure we end at 1:30 so that you've got time to take a break. This PowerPoint presentation is in the asynchronous presentations. So you'll see it there, and I'm happy also I'm sure they'll post links again through OTL just so you can access everything. So I'm Melissa Winchell. I haven't met all of you, but I am an associate professor in secondary education, and I'm also the part-time faculty coordinator at the university. So a lot of you probably are getting way too many emails from me. So I'm sorry for that, but I'm glad to be in touch with so many incredible part-time faculty. It's been a real joy for me this year. So we're here today to talk about taking a look at our syllabi, and I will just put in parentheses here, a lot of what we say today could apply to a lot of our different course materials, right? So we'll kind of be syllabi focused, but I hope you'll use some of these ideas as you think about the other materials you're using in your course or throughout your course. And we're going to try to apply an anti-racist and equity lens to thinking about syllabi. How is it that we make our syllabi say something, right, about our positionality and also more accessible for all of our students. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some ideas and pose some questions for you. Our goal together in the 30 minutes we have is to try to come up with some ideas to improve our syllabi. I think we all are in process and at various stages kind of along this continuum of becoming anti-racist educators or equitable educators. And I know that those have two very different meanings, but I'm going to use them both today to kind of cover all of the various kinds of identities that we want to include in our classrooms and all of the differences we want to include in our classrooms as well. So I hope you'll come away from today with some actual ideas for improving your syllabi. So I just want to start with a shared understanding so that we can kind of meet on a common ground. And that is that, and you can tell I'm a former English teacher here, both anti-racist teaching and learning to be an anti-racist educator and designing our syllabi, they're both processes of revision, right? So we're never complete as educators, as anti-racist educators, we're never complete, that's for sure. And also it's true that our course materials are never complete, right? So of course we give our students something when the semester starts because that's the time to do it. But what we're giving them is always something that's still in process. So we may not change it for the whole semester, but certainly by the time we revisit the course the next time, hopefully we're revising and making changes, right? So I just, with that in mind, and you'll see why that will be really important to the kinds of conversations I hope to have with you today and to my own kind of vulnerable sharing of where I'm at with my own anti-racist teaching and syllabus design and kind of intersecting those. So with humility, I say, please accept that I myself am in this process of revision. And as well as we talk with each other, we want to accept that we all are in different places in this process ourselves. So to get started today, I want to encourage you and invite you to have a syllabus handy, if there is one handy to you that you can bring up on screen. I don't know about you, but I have like 200 tabs already open today from workshops. So if that feels overwhelming to you, it's fine. But if you have one handy, that will be helpful to you. If you don't, it's okay. I'd like you to think about a specific course that you're teaching, and you can just imagine the syllabus for that course, if that's easier for you. If you're not teaching a course, maybe think about a syllabus that you've seen or an assignment or something that you've given to students on behalf of your office, right? So maybe it's a handout or a brochure or something like that. And what I'm going to do is just for maybe 3 minutes, and I know this is like so short and sad, but for 3 minutes, I'd love for you just in a pairing. So I'm going to break you out to a breakout room with one other person here and just talk about what does that syllabus or that artifact from your office or your course say about your relationship to equity, about the relationships between equity and your curriculum or the relationships between equity and your students. You're not going to be able to address all those questions. So pick one and take about 3 minutes, let both of you share. So one of you share for about a minute and then the other one. Before I put you in breakout rooms, are there questions about what you're going to do when you get there? Okie dokie. Seeing none then, I will put you into breakout rooms. Again, you'll be in pairs. So you should be, oops, sorry, I just lost my little thing, but it's coming, I promise. There we go. You should be getting an invitation for the room. Hi, those of you just joining, we just went to breakout rooms. I'm gonna just actually assign you to some. So you should get an invitation here to join into a breakout room. Oopsie.
Melissa, you might want to take Mark and Nicholas out of breakout rooms.
Oh yeah, thank you. Yeah, I'm moving people around too, thank you.
Yep.
Stephen, welcome. Folks are in a breakout room, but they're going to be coming back in just under a minute. So I'm just going to keep you here in the main room until we till folks come back.
No problem. No problem. Thanks.
Of course, no problem. Welcome. We're just waiting a moment for everyone to join back. Here they come. All right, all, welcome back. I wish we had so much more time, but I'm hoping you at least got started with this kind of thinking that, you know, the things that we create for our classroom, our syllabi, artifacts, can say something about equity or can be noticeably quiet on the subject, right? So for those of you who've joined us since we began, I mentioned at the beginning that I'll be doing some sharing of my own syllabus here in sort of the spirit of revision and humility, just to kind of say this is where I'm at and pointing out to you where I know that I need to do more. So I want to guide you through sort of a syllabus audit. And again, this presentation is available in the asynchronous portion of the conference today. I'm also posting in chat a link to one of my syllabi from this past semester, which you'll see kind of screenshots of, but I know they can be rather small. So if you'd like to view the syllabus in its entirety, you can use that link there to take a look, and I'll be sharing a couple things about it as we move forward. So I've tried to group questions for you, questions that will help you to audit your own syllabus under some different categories. So the first one I know sounds a little strange, but I think design is actually really important because as we think about who our students are, many of them at Bridgewater State are first generation students, for example, and we think about the kinds of media they usually consume and what kinds of literacy most appeal to them and make the most sense for them. I think we also need to think about then what our syllabi should look like or feel like, so that we're both enticing them to actually read the syllabus. And I wish we had more time to talk about a lot of other ways we can entice students to read the syllabus, but also making it really accessible to them visually and in terms of literacy and reading. So I have put a small screenshot here of the first page of the syllabus that I also posted for you in the chat. I moved to this kind of format a few years ago. I use PowerPoint, by the way, to create this. So as you know, you can save PowerPoints as PDFs as well as a lot of other kinds of files. So, but this is the first page of my syllabus. It looks a little bit more like a web page, right? Or a flyer than it does like a Microsoft Word document with tons of writing. And I found my students to really respond well, actually, to reading this way. And again, I'll feel free to post questions in the chat and I'll do what I can to get to them as we move through some of this content here. The other thing I think that's really important, what we know from the anti-racist research and literature is that our students need us as faculty to be accessible to them relationally, right? They need to know something about who we are as people. So, you know, we're not asking you to disclose your whole life story, right? Obviously. But thinking about what could I share with my students that might be relevant to this course, to who they are and their identities, or to access and their success here on campus. So one thing that I've done, and I know many faculty may not feel comfortable doing this, but I've made a conscious choice to do this. I include a little portion on my syllabus. I think it's on page 2. The title there you can see says, "Are you disabled? So am I." And again, just being real explicit about, you know, different ways that I identify, and then also just kind of celebrating, like disability is not something that we like put in the corner of the syllabus and say, oh, sorry, if you're disabled, you should probably reach out to the disability, you know, but like, yeah, lots of us who are disabled are proud to be so and proud to be part of a larger movement around disability rights and advocacy. So thinking about, again, how what I share can also open doors for students, right? And maybe change some minds and some mindsets as well. The other thing I've really tried to do is to make office hours clear to my students. So this comes from one of my undergrad syllabi. I didn't do this on the grad syllabi that I shared with you because my graduate students know what office hours are, but for my undergrads, I don't call them, you'll see down here kind of towards the bottom of this column, I don't call my office hours, I call them student hours. And I make really clear, like, student hours are for students. Please don't leave me sitting there all by myself, staring at a Zoom screen, right? They're for you, and I expect you to come, and I want you to be there, because I think office hours makes it sound like, well, first of all, we're not really necessarily in our offices, but also like maybe we're busy in our office, and maybe they shouldn't bother us. So again, using kind of relational language that's going to make sense to our audience, like to first generation students, for example, right? So then I put some questions here around race. I think it's really important that we identify our race in the syllabus. I do this by a picture because it's pretty obvious that I identify as white, but on my first day of class, I also say that I identify as a white and kind of talk through my other identities as well. And then thinking beyond, our own race to thinking about what we're representing in our syllabus, right? So thinking about the images on our syllabus, what am I representing in terms of race there? Thinking about the texts that we include in our syllabus, right? What are the texts that we're assigning or recommending? What appears on the bibliography or the suggested bibliography of our syllabi? So again, this comes from one of the syllabi I use this semester. Students get to choose their own book around equity, history in the United States and schooling. And almost all of the books on my list are like pinpoint those issues, and almost all of them are written by BIPOC authors. So they're not kind of a white centrist view of history or history of public schooling. So something to definitely think about. And there is just one of a few examples of just using images, right? And thinking about representing, multiple races in our syllabus. Language, as I've already kind of touched on, is really, really important. Obviously, in academia, we have like our own way of talking. And it can be really off-putting for students who are not have not had as much background with academic language, right? So how can we use language in ways that is accessible to them, avoids jargon? How can we make sure we're using the most current language to identify marginalized communities? So really checking in, right? What do communities want to call themselves, right? Not what I think they should be called, but what are they calling themselves? And then also identifying our pronouns. You may have seen on the earlier slide, my pronouns are identified on the first page of my syllabus, and then also on Zoom, next to my name, I've written my pronouns as well, so that students get used to seeing them and know that it's perfectly acceptable and expected that they share their pronouns with the class if they're comfortable doing so. This is an area that I'm still working on. So one of the problems I've realized with using PowerPoint and making this very nice visual looking syllabus is that it saves, because it's more image based, it can be hard for a text to speech reader to read it. So that's something that I definitely need to think about, and will be, Jenna Shales is on this call, so I'll be reaching out to her about that. But again, thinking about affirming disabilities and even learning differences, right? Thinking about the kinds of assignments we're given, the power of student choice in being able to represent what they know in our assignments, and expressing our commitment, right? We're committed not just to Black Lives Matter, right? We're also committed to disability rights and to disability advocacy. So not only are you not putting me out by asking for an accommodation, but accommodation is my gig, right? Like, this is what I'm here to do, and sending that message really, really clearly to our students. And then policy is a under talked about, I think, part of this whole idea of equity in terms of our teaching. And so when we're writing policies for our classes, what I don't want to do is say, oh, these policies are anti-racist and these policies are not. I think what's more important is to ask deeper questions like, are policies clear to students? Have I made them clear from the start? When I make exceptions, do I give exceptions to every student? So yes, one student emails me to say, they had to work late, and yes, they procrastinated, but could they have an extension? Do I then in turn offer that extension to every student in the class, right? Because when we rely on our students to communicate with us, we are showing our bias. And our bias is, especially for those of us like me who are white, is that of course you would just tell your professor if you need something, right? Or of course you would ask for help. Of course you would communicate what's going on with your professor, right? But that's not true in every community. And we can't and should not make that assumption of our students. And then thinking about course due dates, making changes rarely to our syllabus and only doing it when it benefits all students. So for example, it probably goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. If we are moving a due date, we move it in a way that benefits students and doesn't put them, we don't make it an earlier assignment, right? We might make it a later assignment. But I highly recommend that we make as few changes as possible, especially right now with the pandemic and remote environment. It's very confusing. One thing that I have done in my online courses is there are 4 parts to every week. And just making that really clear, this graphic, it's an infographic I got off of Canva, and then obviously revised. Appears in my syllabus and appears on my Blackboard course. And every week of my Blackboard course looks exactly like this. There's a folder with course content, a folder with conversation, a folder with video analysis, and a folder with long-term assignment stuff. And every week kind of follows the exact same schedule and looks exactly the same to the student. And I find, again, for students who are minoritized students, that is especially helpful because it explicitly and implicitly and repetitively teaches the routine and expectation of the course to them. And I think gives them the most opportunity to succeed. And then thinking about student supports, one thing I learned when I was a community college professor at Massasoit, we can never do enough of bringing student supports into our classroom. I think that expectation that maybe many of us grew up with, that if you need support, you'll go find it as a student. We need to get rid of that. Again, our bias is showing, and we need to assume that our students need us to bring the supports to them. And so as often as we can, we need to say, here's some supports that are available to you. You'll notice throughout my syllabus, I use questions as titles, right? Like, hey, are you hungry? You're not the only one, right? Do you need academic support, right? Like instead of saying, you know, just kind of these headers that don't kind of appeal to them, right? And just making clear all those are live links for them. They can click right on them. They can get to the websites. They can get the support they need. And then I will say, just as a parenthesis, doing the same in our Blackboard courses, making these links available. I know for me, I have a new, as of the spring, COVID section of my Blackboard course where the student, the application for applying to the Student Emergency Fund and COVID Fund is always there. And I'm constantly reminding students, if you need something, don't forget, this is available to you, right? So making all of those supports available to them and reminding them again and again that they're there. And so much of this, I think, depends on how we frame things, right? So in my disability section of my syllabus, I say, I have a mental health diagnosis. So if you need something, like you need someone to walk you to the wellness center when we were on campus, or you want me to make a connection for you, like that's okay. I can do that for you, right? There's not going to be judgment here around those things. So again, making things accessible and framing them in ways that are equitable and that send the message that we're not trying to further minoritize or marginalize our students. Also, I should say, protecting their privacy, right, around these things. We're not asking them to identify to us if they actually make use of these things, right? They don't have to do that. They're under no obligation to tell us anything personal about their own lives. And I think too, and this is one area of revision that I am definitely going to make for next semester. I want my students to know, if you're queer, we have a cool Pride Center and you should, you know, be connected. They're doing amazing events on Zoom, right? They have a newsletter you should be getting to your email box. So just letting our minoritized students know that there are places for them to connect even during this pandemic. And then just some kind of more general equity questions. are my values clear to my students? So what I'm showing here is a page from my syllabus where my objectives for the course are clearly defined. That's that first box there at the top. And a couple of those talk about diversity and about supporting all identities in their future classrooms. So my students will be teachers eventually, right? So making any opportunity we have to make those values clear, doing so, using images that make those values clear as well. And then how can I communicate cultural humility to my students? So yes, this is something that I am learning and researching and publishing about, right? But I am a learner, right? And I'm okay with being called out. And I'm okay with that because I want to learn more and become a more equitable educator. So I wanted to give you a few moments because I know I talked a lot and quickly. I'm going to post in the chat as well. I don't know if you've ever used a Padlet. Unfortunately, BSU does not have a license for Padlet. So once you use your first couple, you'd have to pay for them yourselves, which I've done because I just love them, using them so much. But I'd like to invite you to click on the link there to the Padlet and to post there either a change that you think you might want to make to your spring syllabus, or if you are already doing some of this work and you have a cool resource to share, please put it there on the Padlet. You can post videos, you can post links, you can post PDFs. And I'm inviting our asynchronous folks as well to do that. So hopefully this will be a resource that we can return to and find a lot of great ideas and resources there as well. So I'm looking through the chat for questions. I don't see any, but if you'd like to unmute yourself while you're posting or put a question in the chat, please do. We have a few minutes left.
One question is, how long is your syllabus?
My syllabus, I think the one I shared with you is 5 or 6 pages.
Wow.
Yeah, I've kind of pared it down over the years. I used to be one of those, well, because I'm an English teacher, I was learning, yeah, and wanted to explain everything, right? So now I'm just trying to figure out, okay, my audience is who and what do they most need, right? Yeah. So, okay, I'm seeing other questions. Okay, so Jabril asked a question. One of the issues that students, especially BIPOC students, raise are the lack of diversity in textbook and books and course materials. Yeah, and even, yeah, the course competencies don't represent them. Yeah, I don't use textbooks in any of my courses, so I may not be the best person to answer this question. So, I think this comes out of my community college teaching background and just working so long. I was at Massasoit for 7 years and was a tenured professor there. Working so long with students who were so under-resourced, they could not afford to buy books even if I assigned them. And so I just quickly realized, like, let's not all just pretend that you're like buying these books that you're not buying. And so I use a lot of kind of open resources, a lot of articles that they can get to online or through the library databases, those kinds of things. So yeah, for that reason, I feel like I have maybe a little bit more freedom, but not all departments maybe would be okay with that. I find that secondary ed textbooks are the worst at teaching people how to teach. I don't know how you're supposed to learn to teach from a textbook. So I'm not a fan, but other people I know in my department do use them. And it is, I think, an issue, not just in terms of what's represented there and what's not, but also in terms of costs and how accessible they are and available to our students. Do I spend a lot of time updating URLs? Yes, thank you, BSU, for migrating whenever that was a year ago and all the links changed. Yeah, I do sometimes spend some time. I check them again and again to make sure that they work. But yeah, I do take some time to do that every semester. But I sort of feel like, I know it's kind of a pain, right? But I just try to keep in mind, like, this is about, a link is about equity and access. And if my students encounter a broken link, then I've just created a hurdle and an obstacle for them that I probably should have tried to avoid, right? So I try to keep the big picture because I'm not a fan of tedious work, so I try to motivate myself that way. Do I get feedback from my students? Yes, they love it. They say it's like one of the coolest syllabi they've ever seen. That said, I've been dinged on my faculty evaluations about my syllabus because more tenured and seasoned faculty don't like the layout. They think it's too busy, right? Because they're not as accustomed to reading web pages and the hyperlink thing. You know, like our students do not read in a linear fashion anymore. Many of us who are younger don't. We follow a link, we go to that, then we follow a link from there, and they're like, oh yeah, go back to what I was originally reading, right? We don't need things linear. So I think it's more accessible for our students, but maybe less accessible to others, but it's fine. I don't care if you, I don't care that I got dinged. I know it's working for my students and I think it's helpful for them. And yeah, future suggestions. I want to add the Renee's question. Sorry, I'm just reading chat quickly. I want to add where students can find support, right? Like affinity groups. I think that's really important on campus. Our Pride Center, the newly named Culture CMA. I don't even know the new name. I'm so sorry. I can't even keep track of what we call our student union anymore. Right. So we like all these places where students could go. I think I want to do that. And then I need to, both on my Blackboard site and with my syllabi, do some disability accessibility work for students who are visually impaired and try to figure out, like in terms of colors and busyness, there might need to be actually a Word doc, you know, all that information in a Word document that could be read by a screen reader. Without all the graphics and all the pretty colors, because that's not accessible to everyone, right? Or, and I can say it's my daughter's autistic, right? That would be too much for her to try to read through something like that. So something that is very plain, I think, and having both options there. So that's something I'm trying to, it's on my list to do in January, you know, in our spare time. Oh, thanks for the shout out on Twitter. That's fun. Oh, Jabral, yeah, God. Yeah, no, I'm finding that too in education. Education doesn't keep up with where a lot of us are at. So if you haven't seen Jabral's question in chat, it is like these accrediting bodies that we have. So like in education, we have them too, right? And I know you do too. They're not always on the same page about anti-racism and social justice and equity. Yeah. And that can be really hard. That's interesting to me that and I'd love to hear from you, Jabral, if you want to unmute, that they're like actually drilling down to the level of your syllabus too. That's really, really interesting. This is when I love to fly the faculty academic freedom flag. It's one of the only times I use it, when it's on behalf of my students. Otherwise, I'm all about like, yes, let's like make sure we're on the same page or whatever. But I think, yeah, I think, you know, you hired me knowing this was my specialty, anti-racist education. If you don't like it, I guess you shouldn't have hired me. I don't know what to tell you. And maybe I don't, you know, and so I just kind of keep pushing back, but I'm not tenured, so maybe I shouldn't be saying that. I don't know. All right, I know, yeah, we're way at time, 1:33. I appreciate you all being here. There's a new session starting, like the next workshop start at 1:15, so there's not as long of a break. So please do feel free to go. I so appreciate your time. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach me. And there are appendices here as well for some other resources, and you'll find that stuff in the asynchronous presentations. So feel free to take a look at those as well. Thank you all. Oh, hi, Melissa. I didn't know you were here. Should stop sharing so I can see people's faces.